Hi, and welcome to the Beginner to Professional Complete Photoshop Guide by Eduonix. This course will be your one-stop shop learning guide for everything you need to know about Adobe Photoshop. Your instructor for this course will be Matthew, and he will help you learn the most important design tool out there in the market. Matthew has over a decade-long experience in graphic and UI design. In this course, you will start with Photoshop from scratch, so if you have no idea how to work with Photoshop, then sit back and relax. However, before you start, you should have Photoshop open and ready to work along with the instructor to get the most out of this course. If you do not have Photoshop involved, you can download a trial copy or purchase a full copy at www.adobe.com/go/try Photoshop. So what can you expect in this course? In this course, you will learn how to get started with your Photoshop, including how to create and work with your workspace, how to open and create new documents, and also how to work with layers and blending them. We will go over various tools that are available in Photoshop, including selection tools, manipulation tools, and creation tools. We will also learn how to work with the workflow. You will also learn how to correct the photo, including for distortion, liquify, as well as different effects such as blurring, hazing, grunge, and so much more. You will then progress on to advanced functions and features of Photoshop, such as beauty retouching, in which you will learn how to retouch human skin, eye, teeth, and hair for beauty shots. You will also learn how to work with certain Adobe extensions. Adobe extensions are certain programs that help accentuate Photoshop's abilities. Adobe programs like Lightroom, Bridge, and Camera Raw are some of these extensions. And finally, you will learn about advanced retouching, in which you will retouch photos for fashion, lighting, and product retouching. All of this is packed in this comprehensive course. This tutorial can help you transition from a newbie Photoshop artist to a professional. So if you want to master Photoshop, hopefully we'll see you inside this course.
Hi there, this is Matthew Brown back with another Eduonix tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over factory default settings and workspaces in Adobe Photoshop. We'll start with the very first thing you need to do when using Photoshop. First, you need to actually open Photoshop to run the program itself. But hold up. Before we run Photoshop, there's one thing we need to do to make sure that we're all on the same page. This goes back to the factory default settings I was talking about. So, if you happen to have Photoshop open already, like I do, please go to the top right corner of the window and click on the X button to close the program. Now, Photoshop is no longer running. Whether you've used your copy of Photoshop or not, it's important to know that Photoshop has a lot of settings that you can customize to your own creative style. These settings will affect the way the program looks and operates. So depending on what you've done with your own copy of Photoshop, and what I've done with mine, we could end up seeing two completely different things. In order for you to get the most out of this course, it's best for all of our settings to be exactly the same. So in order to do this, we're going to have to reset our individual copies of Photoshop to their factory default settings. There are several ways to do this. I've found that the easiest way for me is through a keyboard shortcut. Keyboard shortcuts are very common in Photoshop, and they exist to speed up the system to match the speed of your creative process. So please, find your shortcut to Adobe Photoshop, but don't double click it just yet. I need you to find the Control, Alt, and Shift keys on your keyboard before we double click the program icon. Our plan is to double click the program icon, then immediately press and hold the Control, Alt, and Shift keys on our keyboard. At that point, we're going to keep holding them down until a dialog box appears. If the box doesn't appear and Photoshop happens to open up just like normal instead, no worries. Just close the program and try again. Odds are it was just a mistiming of the Control, Alt, and Shift keys on the keyboard. As long as we do this right, and you press those keys right after double clicking the icon, we should have no worries. Okay, so ready? Double click, Control, Alt, Shift. Okay, a dialog box appeared. It's asking us if we want to delete the Adobe Photoshop settings file. I'm going to go ahead and go over and click Yes, because I do want to delete the Adobe Photoshop settings file. What this will do is delete the file that Photoshop automatically creates whenever you change any settings within the program. Now, with that settings file deleted, the program will automatically boot with the factory default settings, and you and I will see the exact same thing on screen. Just as a quick tip, this is also a good thing to try if your copy of Photoshop starts to act a little bit funky. You might find that resetting to the factory default settings might solve any issues you may be getting within Photoshop. Alright, things are picking up. We are now inside the program. We've made the first step in mastering Adobe Photoshop. Now, I don't know about you, but this layout is looking a little bit dark for me. One neat feature that I like about Photoshop is the option to customize the brightness of our interface. I'm going to drag my mouse up to the menu bar and click on Edit. Then I'm going to keep hovering down till I get to Preferences, and I'm going to hover straight over to Interface. Now we've pulled up the Preferences window on the Interface tab. The very first option that we see under Appearance is our color theme, and we have 4 options given here, going from darkest to lightest. Because I like things to be a little bit brighter than Photoshop selects as the default, I'm going to go ahead and click the brightest color they've provided. Now the interface is much brighter, and it seems like the buttons tend to stand out just a little bit more too. I like the way this looks much better. So to apply these changes, I'll go over to the right and click OK. Like I said before, there are many settings that you can customize to your creative style. Maybe you're using Photoshop purely for motion graphics. Maybe you're using Photoshop for your photography. Since there are so many features in Photoshop, it can be necessary to narrow them down to the ones that you use the most. For this reason, Photoshop has a few default workspaces to accommodate your needs. Let's go up to the menu bar again, but this time we'll click on Window. Then we'll go down to Workspace, and then go over and click Motion. Now we've been switched to the default motion workspace. This would primarily be used for animation and motion graphics. You may notice a few changes here. A new tab has been added to the bottom of our workspace. This one's labeled Timeline. And this is where we would see individual frames of images for our animation. Some more changes in our workspace are near the top right corner of the screen. The Color and Swatches tab have been replaced by a histogram and our document info. Not to mention our side panel here has gained an additional 6 buttons to assist in animation using Photoshop. This is just one of the many different workspaces possible within Photoshop, and there are several more that are available just by default. So let's go back up to that menu bar, we'll click Window again, we'll hover to Workspace, and then we'll hover over to Painting. Right away you can see that our histogram and info tabs have been replaced by swatches and navigator tabs. We also have a whole new tab full of brush presets. This workspace has been made to accommodate the tasks of a digital painter. We're not going to be doing any animation or painting at the moment, so let's go back to our original workspace. We could go back and click Window on the menu bar again, or you may notice that here on the top there's a button under the Minimize, Restore, and Close buttons. This is a quick workspace shortcut. So since Essentials was the first workspace that we started out with, that's the one that we'll go back to. Photoshop even allows you to create and save your own workspaces. All we have to do is adjust the layout to the way that we prefer and save our progress. For instance, we could go over here and click and drag our toolbar and drag it right into the middle of our workspace and keep it there. And also, if we felt like it, we could go over here, grab our Layers panel, and drag it to where that toolbar was. Now watch what happens as we approach the edge of where the toolbar was. You'll notice that a blue vertical line has appeared. This represents to where the panel will snap to once you release it. Let's say that we prefer this layout for our creative style. Let's save it so we can switch to and from it whenever we like. Let's go back up to that shortcut button again. We'll click on it, and then we'll hover down to New Workspace. We can name this whatever we like. Let's just call it New Workspace. And then we'll go over and click Save. Now let's say that we want to go back to our default workspace. Which one was that again? Over here we go to the Essentials workspace. We'll go ahead and click that. Uh-oh, nothing's changed. That's okay. All we have to do is click on this again, go down to Reset Essentials. Everything is back to the way it was. And now our new workspace is available for us to switch to whenever we like. You can see it right there. I encourage you to play around a little bit with layouts. It may not be that important now, but down the road it can be very helpful once you develop your creative process. And remember, if you make a mistake and delete or add something that you decide that you don't want, don't panic. Just switch to a default workspace and reset it. In the next video, we will focus on creating a new document within Photoshop and opening pre-existing images for editing. Hello again, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to discuss how to open photos in Adobe Photoshop and create new documents from scratch. To start off, I'm going to close Photoshop and show you how to open Photoshop without even having to click on its desktop shortcut. I'll go to the top of the screen and click the Close button. Now that Photoshop is closed, you may see that I have a couple different icons on my desktop. These are royalty-free images that I've downloaded online. You can use whatever photos you already have on your computer, or you can simply Google royalty-free photos to get access to a sea of beautiful images ready for you to play with. I would like to open this photo in Photoshop. So all I'm going to do is right-click it and hover over to Open With. Then I'll go down and click Adobe Photoshop CC 2014. And now we just wait for Photoshop to load. Photoshop can have slow or fast load times, depending on the speed and capacity of your computer. If you're experiencing some slow performance, try quitting some applications you don't need to be running. This will allow Photoshop to use more of your computer's memory and will improve performance overall. Okay, here's my photo loaded into Photoshop. Now we have a much closer look at the photo. It's of a woman and a little girl laying on the floor with a laptop. What could they be so happy about? You know what? I bet they're learning how to use Photoshop. You may also notice that there's a new tab on the top left of my workspace with the title of my photo. And there's also been a change in the Layers panel to the right. There's now a layer called Background that has a tiny thumbnail of my photo. Now I'd like to open a different photo without ever leaving Photoshop. I'm just going to go up to the menu bar and click on File. Then hover directly down to Open and click. Then, in the navigation window, we're already seeing the files that are on my desktop. And I want to open up the cityscape image. So I'm going to select that and then go down and click on Open. Now we see my image of an illustrated cityscape. This is just a bunch of buildings on a curved plane in the nighttime. You may also notice that we still have the tab for the previous photo in our workspace. So all we would have to do is click that tab to switch to that photo within Photoshop. Now we have no problem switching back and forth between images, and we can edit them simultaneously in Photoshop. Finally, let's create a new document from scratch. Go back up to the menu bar and click File again. Only this time, we're going to click on New. This brings up the new document window, and we are met with plenty of options before we can proceed. Let's do a rundown of all the buttons here so we have a better idea of what we're dealing with. The first option that we have is Name. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the name for our new document, much like the names for our previous images. Next is Preset. Now this operates much like the workspace presets, and that these presets are here to give you some standard options to choose from while you begin working with Photoshop. The preset affects all these options in the space below. So let's check these out. Width and height. These are very straightforward. They're just the numbered units of width and height defined by these boxes to the right. Right now, it's set up to 7 by 5 inches. Let's change our measurement to something else by clicking on Inches. And then we'll go up to Pixels. You can see that the numbers have scaled proportionately to the measurement that we've selected on the right. So 5 by 7 inches is proportionately equal to 504 by 360 pixels. We can change these numbers to any dimensions that we like. Generally, pixels are used for digital on-screen graphics, and inches are used for printed graphics. But both can be converted to the other, and neither terms are entirely exclusive to digital or printed graphics. Below width and height is a resolution option. This affects the amount of pixels that are displayed per inch of space. So the higher the number goes, the more detail the image will need. The numbers tend to vary from different systems, but 72 is usually the standard for on-screen graphics, and 300 is usually used for printing. It can be easy to think that a higher resolution will result in a better image, but this isn't always the case. My suggestion is to leave the numbers alone unless you know for sure that you need a certain resolution before proceeding. You may also notice that the image size, that is, the amount of hard drive space that the image takes in your computer, is drastically affected by the image's resolution. So to save space and performance, you may want to keep things from getting a little too big. Next up is the color mode. Now this is the option that will constrain the image to certain ranges and types of color. You can generally stick to RGB for digital graphics and CMYK for printed graphics. There are also other options to choose from, but we will cover those in a later video. This button here on the right that says 8-bit refers to the limitation of unique colors in the image. Much like resolution, a higher number will yield a higher quality image. At the moment though, 8-bit images are very popular and perform very well with perfectly adequate quality. Our next option is the background contents. Whenever you create a new document in Photoshop, there needs to be at least one layer in it. This option allows you to decide what you want that layer to look like. You can choose a solid color, like white or black, or you can pick a custom color that you can define in the color picker. You also have the option for your layer to be transparent. This will allow you to have your image blend against another background separate from Photoshop. Now there's some advanced options: the color profile and the pixel aspect ratio. I try not to mess with these unless I absolutely have to, because changing these settings may make your image clash with another program or image you happen to be working with. For now, we're going to leave these alone and stick with our default options. Right now, our document preset is set to the default Photoshop size. Let's see what happens to the options below when we change it. Go back up to the preset and click Default Photoshop Size to reveal more options. If you hover down to US Paper and click, you can see that all of our size options have been altered and our resolution has been increased to 300. Now let's go back up and click our preset button, and this time we'll go to Web. Then click. Again, our sizes have changed and our resolution is back to 72. Just like the workspaces, we can switch to and from these presets when working with new documents. They are very helpful as sorts of templates for the standard sizes and colors of multiple types of images. Okay, those are all the options that you're going to face when creating a new document in Photoshop. We will discuss Photoshop layers in the next video. Hello again, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss a key feature in Adobe Photoshop. That is, working with layers. If Photoshop were to be a big dinner, layers would probably be the steak and potatoes. There are many other features within Photoshop, but none of them can hope to play such a big role in the design process. While they're not a feature exclusive to Photoshop, layers are the foundation upon which Photoshop stands. Layers allow you to stack and rearrange any object, effect, or adjustment you want. Not only does this allow you to create complex graphics, it also allows you to play with your image without making commitments on its overall composition. This makes layers the most fundamental part of the design process. To start off, we'll open some documents that we can use to test our layers. I'm going to import some photos from my desktop by going up to the menu bar and then selecting File, Open. I have 3 different pictures here, and I want to open them all in Photoshop at the same time. There are several ways we can do this. The first way is to click in this white space outside the thumbnails and drag this blue rectangle over them to select them. This way of selecting files is very straightforward. You just click and hold to draw a blue rectangle around what you'd like to select. You can confirm that these are selected by checking below in the File Name box and see that the names of all 3 of our pictures are listed inside. I'm not going to open these pictures just yet. I'd like to show you a couple more ways to select multiple files. So, to deselect them, I will just click once again in this white space. The next way is to click the first file, press and hold the Shift key on your keyboard, then go all the way over to your last file, click it, then release Shift. Using the Shift key allows you to select every file between the first and the last one that you click. There's one more method I want to show you, so I'm going to click the white space again to deselect these files. Another way is to use the Control key to select individual files, one after the other. So, press and hold the Control key on your keyboard. Then we can click the first, the last, and the middle if we want. Confirm that the files are in the File Name box below, and then click Open to proceed. Now Photoshop has opened all 3 of our images. You can see them represented by the tabs on top, and switch between them at your will. If you pay attention to the Layers panel for each document, you can see that each file has one layer, representing the image that we see in our workspace. I would like to combine all of these separate documents into my one document with multiple layers. There are several ways to do this. Probably the easiest way to do it would be to make sure that we have our Move tool selected. That's the topmost tool on the Tools panel. Then click the image in our workspace and drag it to our first tab. As you drag the image onto the workspace of our first document, you may notice a change in our mouse cursor. There's a plus sign next to it now. This is your indicator that you're dragging a new layer with your mouse. I'm going to go ahead and release my mouse key to drop the new image onto my workspace. When I drop this, it's just going to drop it according to wherever I have my mouse, and not centered onto my workspace like I want it to be. I'm going to redo this in a way that drops the image directly in the center where I want it. But first, I'll delete my layer by going over to the Layers panel. You can see that my new layer is already selected. I'm going to click the layer in the blank space beside it and drag it down to the trash can icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Then I'll release my mouse button to delete the layer. Now I'll go back up to my last document tab. Once again, with the Move tool still selected, I will drag the image over to my first document tab. Now, while holding my mouse over the workspace, I will press and hold the Shift key on my keyboard before releasing my mouse. This has placed my new image perfectly in the center of my first document, and you can see it labeled as Layer 1 in my Layers panel. I'm going to show you another easy way to bring my second document into my first one, but since we've already copied the third document into the first one, we now have no need to keep that tab around. So I'll go ahead and click the X on the tab to close it. Now that we just had the second document to worry about, I'm going to copy the contents of its layer and paste them into my first document. To do this, go up to the menu bar and press Select, and then click All right below it. Now we have a bounding box circling the contents of our workspace. This represents that the contents of this layer are selected. Then I'll go up to Edit, then Cut, to remove the contents of this layer. Now I'll go back over to the first document, and then I'll go back up again to the menu bar. I'll click Edit, and then Paste. Now the contents have been cut and pasted onto a new layer in our first document. We're going to be managing these layers within the Layers panel, so it might be a good idea to label them properly. To change the layer name, simply double-click the existing name to highlight and replace the text. I'm going to change this label to Laptop. To see the layer below it, just click the eye icon to the left of the layer thumbnail. Now we are seeing Layer 1. But it's important to realize that we still have our Laptop layer selected, and any changes we make to the layer's contents will affect the Laptop layer, even if we can't see it. Whenever you want to make a change to a layer, check the layer you have selected before proceeding. Now let's double-click the Layer 1 label to rename it to Swimming. Then I'll click the eye icon to the left of the layer thumbnail to make it invisible. But watch what happens when we double-click our bottom layer, named Background. Instead of simply highlighting the layer's label, a new layer dialog box appeared. This happened because this was the original layer when we first opened this document, and by default, Photoshop keeps this layer locked from the beginning. Now I will type a new name, Cityscape, and then click OK. You may notice that our layer's label has changed from the italicized font to this straight font that the other layers have. Also, the lock that was once here on the right is now gone. This is because we have converted this layer from a locked background layer to an unlocked standard layer. If I want to reposition these layers with respect to each other, all I have to do is click and drag one above or below the other. You may notice that a horizontal gray line appears whenever I get close to an edge of another layer. This line represents where the layer will snap to once I release it. But what if I want to blend these layers together so that we can sort of see through them? No problem. The most standard way to blend one layer with another is to control its opacity. Opacity is how visible something is, so the higher the opacity, the more you can see it. Transparency is the exact opposite. The more transparent something is, the less you can see it. If we select our top layer, we can see that there's an option for opacity and that it's at 100% because it's completely visible. We can reduce the opacity by clicking on the opacity text and dragging to the left. Now we can sort of see through this layer to the one below it. I'm going to delete this layer because I want to show you another neat way that you can blend layers together. To the left of opacity, there's a button that says Normal on it. If we click this, it expands to a drop-down menu full of other options. These options are called blend modes, and they change the way the color and exposure behaves on our layer. I'm going to go down and click Multiply. You can see that not only does my layer seem more transparent, it is also darker than it used to be. Now I'll go back up to my blend modes again and switch it from Multiply to Screen. This, once again, made my layer more transparent, and this time the layer appears much brighter. Now, if we go back to blend modes again, this time we'll go all the way down and click Divide. We can see that this produces a very different result entirely. I encourage you to play with layers and blending on your own time. It will be a lot of fun, and you'll get a feel for how Photoshop's layers really operate. In the next video, we will begin going over the tools available to us within Photoshop.